Hello, 6915. I thought that I would run through the maps you made for that last module. I didn't ask you to put it on a discussion board. I think I'll do that next semester. So instead, I just pulled everyone's names off of them just because I didn't give you a heads up that I was going to share them. So I thought I would just talk through them briefly and go over some of the effective things that I saw you guys doing, and then I'll give you all some individual feedback in addition. So there was a really nice kind of distribution of maps, most of them the contiguous US, but a couple of you zoomed in and did something a little different, which I think is really cool. This map here combined using select by attribute and displaying using symbology based on attribute values, and got into some of the new symbology configurations that are available in ArcGIS Pro with this kind of inset gradient. So that's cool. It's really interesting the way the bigger cities track with the Snake River. It's really a distinct kind of geography. Yep, I think this is really effective, showing the mountains with a very natural color scheme for the DEM and the nice bold state outlines, in addition to a good coordinate system for Idaho, so it's tipped really nicely. This next map does the same kind of thing. This student was able to employ a clip, whether they selected these states or did a display clip. I'm not sure if you cut the DEM or if it's a display clip. A display clip is something where it's kind of done on the fly. You're not actually changing the data at all or cutting the data and creating a new output. You're just hiding it. So you could create a set of these state polygons and then use them to just hide everything that's outside their boundaries. It's called a display clip. But great use of an inset map to kind of show us where we're talking about. And another select by attribute, and going in and finding out which earthquakes happened in the 21st century, and then showing us the proximity to the terrain, the mountains. So yeah, just a lot of context that supports the map's purpose, which is really nice. This is really nice and simple. Elevation of the contiguous US with a unique color ramp. This is a kind of a color ramp that we typically associate with precipitation, with highs and lows, but it's a nice gradient that gives us a lot of variation over the range of elevation values so that we can see a lot of the detail. Especially here, some of the simpler color schemes that have fewer colors in them, this ends up just looking very homogeneous across the eastern half of the US. But I think it's very effective that the base map is turned off and we just focus on the contiguous US. This is another one that employs a select by attribute, or maybe I should just say symbolizing based on an attribute value. Really cleanly presented. Really straightforward. This is a sans serif. Serif is, let's see if this is a serif font, and there's absolutely nothing wrong with it. It means it's got the little flares here. Those are serifs. So this map is using a font that's sans serif. It just has a clean look that kind of goes along with the nuclear theme. But the text hierarchy here is really strong. This is kind of a lighter and maybe even looks gray relative to the black title. And then we've got the context of the number of reactors at each location and the context of the terrain, which is interesting. You could choose to put the state outlines on here to give us that geographic context, or maybe major cities to give us the context of human populations. But here you're saying, no, the interest for me is the proximity to, maybe the coastlines or the terrain itself. So things to keep in mind. Same idea here where we've got the number of reactors at each location. So a nice symbology based on attribute value. And here we've kept it simple by not including the elevation, but here we've got a more political map. So here we're talking about the boundaries and how these things relate to different states, which is also really interesting. Major rivers of the contiguous U.S. This is kind of the example I gave, and there's nothing wrong with that. We've got state boundaries for the human kind of context, but the focus is on, because of the light treatment of the state outlines, the focus is on the rivers and how they interact with the terrain, or maybe are informed by the elevations. It's also interesting to include the political boundaries, because we can see where they match up really well with some of the major rivers, and where the rivers start to define those boundaries for us. Nice balance on the page and nice clean presentation. Same idea here. You can see what I'm talking about. The symbology here is more balanced between the rivers and the states. They're treated very similarly, so we lose that hierarchy a little bit. And here the author is saying, no, they're equally important. I've just differentiated with blue. So another thing to just keep in mind. So as far as whether or not you want to use a legend, if you choose to use a legend in a map like this, you're saying, hey, these actual numbers are really important, and I want to communicate those to you, that we've got a range in elevation in the lower U.S. between 1 and 4,300 meters. Otherwise, it's really just there for context, visual context. We can see it's very intuitive that the white is high and it goes down to the green. So there's just that good intuition from the smart color scheme choice. Not convinced that you need to include the rivers in the legend, only because it's very intuitive and logical, because you're calling our attention to it in the title. So oftentimes in legends, you want to communicate things that you can't convey intuitively with your symbology. Just rule of thumb. But it's handled beautifully, and I love the gap that was put around here. That's a setting in the legend properties. But it's an XY gap that gives you that little bit of room, and that's really important. Otherwise, the default comes in very crowded. The border is tight and wrapped right up next to it. Yep, same idea here with a different set of context. Here we've got the state capitals, and so how do state capitals relate to the proximity to rivers? Losing the state outline. So it's again, just, author choice and what you want to draw our attention to. It looks like, yeah, it's kind of confusing. Yeah, it's kind of tricky when you use a base map that has labels on it like this. You run the risk of a solid fill partially covering that text up. I think in a case like this, it's better to turn off the base map so that we don't have that conflict. It also avoids a big piece of text like Canada right at the top in the middle of the page, which isn't what the map is about. So it helps avoid conflict like that. But I love this color scheme. It's really dry and kind of oppressive to me. I think about climate change, and while it's it's just a color scheme that's showing that the mountains are in dark and then the lower areas in light, it definitely has a desiccated look to it, which is kind of disturbing. But I love the juxtaposition then with the rivers. They read well against this lighter area here. Anyway, nice job, everybody. Everyone included author and data credits. It's really important to cite your sources, how you choose it. We don't typically make formal maps like this very often. Typically, we're making maps for publications or a PowerPoint presentation or report where there's going to be other text. You might have a data section at the end with all your references. So, this, I have you guys do this just so we can have conversations about balance and alignments and text hierarchy and things like that. But typically in your map, you only want to include the very basics. Scale bars aren't needed unless there's no context, no spatial context that could give it away. If you've got, a major city and a major landmark, then you don't need to have a scale bar. That's not what they're for. We're not going to go in and, hold up our thumbnail to it and then make measurements on a map. They need to be rather intuitive. Road maps that you buy and you stick in the back of your car, those are different. Those we don't use those anymore really because we use our phones and our nav systems. But scale bars and north arrows are really quite passé, but have a time and place. If you rotate your map away from north, if you're showing an area that's very small with no landmarks where we cannot distinguish intuitively where north is, then yeah, throw a north arrow in there. Just make sure you keep it really small and out of the way visually. Okay, well, anyway, great job, and I hope you guys got something out of this semester. It's great to watch your final maps come together.